My daughter-in-law canned my health insurance, claiming the family needed to cut expenses. Our priorities are clear. Raising children and building a life not prolonging yours, she said. I thought this was the worst thing that could happen until I opened the next envelope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The insurance cancellation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through my mail slot like a death sentence wrapped in corporate letterhead. I held the paper with trembling fingers, reading the words that confirmed what Pamela had told me 3 days earlier. Policy terminated due to non-payment of premiums. My daughter-in-law's voice still echoed in my mind, cold and clinical as she delivered the news in my own kitchen. Our priorities are clear. Raising children and building a life, not prolonging yours. The words had hit me like a physical blow. But what cut deeper was watching my son Lester sitting there, 45 years old. His head bowed like a chastened child while his wife dismantled what little security I had left. I set the notice on my kitchen table next to the pill organizer that had become my morning ritual. 7 compartments each day measured out in white tablets and blue capsules that kept my heart beating steadily, my blood pressure stable, my arthritis manageable. Without insurance, those pills would cost more than my monthly Social Security check. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in with each breath. I walked to the living room window and gazed out at the maple tree Lester had planted when he was 12, its branches now thick enough to shade half the front yard. 33 years it had been growing, just like the distance between us. My fingers traced the windowsill where I'd carved his initials during one of his teenage rebellions, when he declared he hated me and would never speak to me again. How naive I'd been to think those were the worst words he'd ever leave unsaid. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Pamela's voice came through with practiced efficiency. Keisha. I hope you understand this wasn't personal. It's just business sense. The kids need new school clothes, and Lester's considering that promotion. We can't have unnecessary expenses holding us back. Unnecessary expenses. 77 years of life reduced to a line item to be crossed out. I understand, I heard myself say, though I understood nothing at all. Good. And Keisha will still have you over for Sunday dinners. Of course, family is important. The line went dead, and I stood there holding the receiver until the dial tone became unbearable. I made tea because it was something to do, because the ritual of heating water and steeping leaves felt like a small act of defiance against the chaos Pamela had introduced into my carefully ordered world. The china cup part of the set my mother had given me for my wedding felt fragile in my hands, a reminder of all the delicate things that could be broken with careless words. The kitchen clock ticked past noon each second, marking time I might not have to waste. I thought about calling Lester directly, but the image of him sitting there silent while Pamela spoke for both of them made my stomach clench. When had my son become so small I opened my address book, its pages yellowed with age, and found Dr. Stevens' number. The receptionist's voice was apologetic but firm. Without insurance, they'd need payment up front for any visits. The cost she quoted made me laugh. Actually laugh at the absurdity of it all. I see, I said. And if someone couldn't afford that, there are free clinics, she offered gently. I can give you some numbers. Free clinics, charity cases. Is this what I'd worked 40 years to become? I hung up and walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in years. 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a basement workshop, where my late husband Glenn had spent countless hours building birdhouses and fixing broken things. The mortgage had been paid off for over a decade. Property taxes were manageable. This house was worth more than most people made in several years. And yet I was being treated like a burden by the very people who would inherit it all. The thought stopped me cold. I climbed the stairs to Glenn's old office, each step a negotiation with joints that protested the effort. His filing cabinet stood exactly as he'd left it 8 years ago, organized with the precision of a man who'd spent his career as an accountant. I found our will in the folder marked Estate Planning. The pages crisp and official. Everything to Lester. The house, the savings accounts, even my jewelry. Standard, really. Leave it all to the only child. Trust that he'd do right by his aging mother. We'd updated it just before Glenn's diagnosis, when the future had seemed so much more certain. I read through the document twice, then set it aside and opened Glenn's laptop. It took me several attempts to remember his password. Bluebird 75, the year we'd married, and his favorite thing to build. The computer wheezed to life, and I spent the next hour relearning how to navigate the internet. The law firm's website looked professional, reassuring. The attorney who'd drawn up our will had retired, but his partner was still practicing. I wrote down the number, then hesitated. Was I really considering this? Was I prepared to weaponize my own death? But then I remembered Pamela's face, the casual cruelty in her voice, the way she'd dismissed my existence as inconvenient. I thought about Lester's silence, his complicity in his own mother's abandonment. I made the call. Torres and Associates. This is Janice. I'd like to schedule an appointment to revise my will, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Certainly. May I ask what type of changes you're considering? I looked around Glenn's office at the photographs of Lester's childhood, at the Father's Day cards he'd made with construction paper and crooked letters, at the proof of love that had somehow curdled into indifference. Complete revision, I said. I need to disinherit my son. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the line had gone dead. Mrs. Mitchell Kesha. Mitchell and I have some very specific ideas about where my assets should go instead. I hung up with an appointment scheduled for Thursday morning. 2 days to prepare to make sure this was what I wanted. 2 days to give Lester a chance to call to apologize, to show some sign that his mother's life still mattered to him. The house settled around me as evening approached its familiar creaks and sighs keeping me company. I made a simple dinner soup and toast, the kind of meal that didn't require much effort or appetite. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights coming on in Lester's house 6 blocks away, where my grandchildren were probably doing homework, where Pamela was planning meals that would stretch their necessary budget. I wondered if they'd mentioned me at all today, or if my elimination from their insurance plan had been as forgettable as crossing an item off a shopping list. The phone remained silent. That night, I lay in the bed I'd shared with Glenn for 42 years, staring at the ceiling and calculating. If I was careful, very careful, my savings might last 2 years, maybe 3, if I gave up the house and moved somewhere smaller, somewhere cheaper. But what kind of life would that be, existing in a studio apartment, rationing my medications, waiting for my body to betray me in ways I couldn't afford to treat, or I could take control? I could ensure that my death, whenever it came, would mean something, that it would teach the lesson I'd failed to teach while living. The decision crystallized in the darkness, sharp and cold, and absolutely certain. On Thursday morning, I would start the process of erasing Lester from my will. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was worth, and I needed to find someone more deserving of what I'd spent a lifetime building, someone who understood the value of loyalty, of respect, of treating family like family instead of like livestock, to be discarded when no longer profitable. The clock beside my bed glowed 2:17 a.m. when I finally closed my eyes. But sleep brought no peace. Instead, it brought dreams of empty chairs at Sunday dinners, of medical bills piling like snowdrifts, of my son's voice saying nothing at all while his wife decided my fate. But beneath the fear, something else was growing, something harder and more purposeful than grief. Wednesday brought rain that matched my mood, steady, relentless, the kind that soaked through everything it touched. I sat in my kitchen with Glenn's laptop open, methodically going through our financial records. What I found made my hands shake with something that went beyond anger. The joint savings account I'd shared with Lester, the one we'd opened when Glenn died, so he could help me manage my finances, showed a pattern I'd been too trusting to notice before. Small withdrawals, always under $1,000, always with explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. Mom, the kids need dental work. Mom, our furnace died. Mom, Pamela's car needs major repairs. $23,000 over 2 years. Nearly half my savings gone. But that wasn't the devastating part. That came when I opened the investment account Glenn had set up for my future care. The one that was supposed to ensure I could afford assisted living if I needed it. The one Lester had convinced me to let him manage for tax purposes. The account was empty. Not low empty, zeroed out just last month with a single electronic transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, reading the numbers over and over, hoping they would change, hoping this was some terrible mistake. The phone rang. Lester's number. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. His voice was carefully casual, the tone he'd used as a teenager when he was hiding something. Lester. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering. I was just looking at some financial statements. A pause. Oh, is everything okay? That depends on how you define. Okay. Where did my investment account go, son? The silence stretched so long, I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, I can explain. Then explain. Pamela's pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. Another grandchild, another mouth to feed, another reason to justify stealing from me. Congratulations, I said, and meant it despite everything. But that doesn't explain where my money went. We needed a down payment for the new house. The one we're buying has 4 bedrooms, better schools. We were going to tell you this weekend. Mom, this is temporary. I'll pay it back. I swear. With what? You just canceled my health insurance because money was tight. That's different. That's monthly expenses. This is an investment. The house will increase in value. And when the time comes, you'll get it all back anyway. When the time comes when I die. He was spending my funeral money while I was still breathing. Lester, that money was for my care. If I get sick, you won't get sick. You're healthy as a horse, and if something happens, we'll figure it out. That's what family does. Family. The word tasted bitter now. I need to go. I said, Mom, wait. Don't be upset. This is good news. Another grandchild and the new house has a mother-in-law suite. We thought maybe, eventually. What eventually you could move in with us when you can't manage the house anymore. I saw it then. The entire plan laid out in cruel clarity. Take my money to buy their dream house. Cancel my insurance to cut their expenses. Then, when I became too costly or inconvenient to maintain in my own home, they'd graciously allow me to occupy their spare bedroom while they lived off my liquidated assets. How thoughtful, I said. I have an appointment to keep. I hung up before he could respond. The law office was in a converted Victorian downtown, its rooms elegant and hushed. Tom Torres was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50 with kind eyes, and the sort of careful manner that suggested he'd dealt with family drama before. Mrs. Mitchell, you mentioned wanting to revise your will. Can you tell me what changes you're considering? I set my folder of financial statements on his desk. I want to disinherit my son completely, and I need to understand what legal protections I have against financial elder abuse. His eyebrows rose slightly, but his voice remained professional. That's a significant decision. May I ask what's prompted this? I told him everything. The cancelled insurance, the emptied investment account, the pattern of withdrawals, Lester's plan to house me like a pet when I became inconvenient. Torres took notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail. Mrs. Mitchell, what your son has done may constitute financial exploitation of an elderly person. There are both civil and criminal remedies available. I'm not interested in sending him to prison. I'm interested in making sure he can't do this to anyone else, and that he understands consequences. Disinheriting him would certainly accomplish that, but you'll need to decide what to do with your assets instead. Do you have other family members? Charities you'd like to support? I thought of my grandchildren, Sophia, 12, and Joseph, 9, growing up under Pamela's influence, learning that family members were disposable when they became inconvenient. What would they think of me in 20 years? Would they even remember me fondly? Or would I become a cautionary tale about ungrateful grandparents who didn't appreciate their family's sacrifices? I need time to think about the beneficiaries, I said. But I want the will changed immediately to remove Lester, and I want safeguards in place to protect my remaining assets. Torres nodded. I can draft a new will within the week. I'd also recommend setting up a trust structure that would prevent any unauthorized access to your funds. And Mrs. Mitchell, you should consider reporting the financial exploitation. Even if you don't want criminal charges, it creates a paper trail. I left his office with paperwork to complete, and a strange sense of lightness, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there. For the first time in months, I was making decisions about my own life instead of having them made for me. The rain had stopped, and downtown Millfield looked almost pretty in the afternoon light. I walked past the coffee shop where I used to meet my book club, past the pharmacy where I'd filled prescriptions for 40 years, past the bank where Glenn and I had opened our first checking account as newlyweds. On impulse, I went inside. Mrs. Mitchell, the young teller. Christine smiled at me warmly. "How are you doing? I need to make some changes to my accounts," I said. "I want to remove my son's name from everything." Her smile faltered. "Oh, is everything all right?" "Everything will be fine," I said, and found that I meant it. The process took an hour. New signature cards, new account numbers, new passwords for online access. Christine was discreet, professional, but I caught her curious glances as she processed the paperwork. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said finally, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem different today. Stronger. Stronger." Yes, that was it exactly. When I got home, Lester's car was in my driveway. He stood on my front porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do when he was in trouble as a child. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a 45-year-old man who had systematically robbed his elderly mother. "Mom, we need to talk." "Yes, we do." I unlocked the door and led him into the living room. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees. "I know you're upset about the money," he began. "Upset?" I laughed, and the sound surprised us both. Lester upset is when someone forgets my birthday. This is something else entirely. I was going to pay it back. "When after I die." He flinched. "Don't say that." "Why not? It's clearly what you're planning for." Pamela made that quite clear when she said, "Your priorities were raising children, not prolonging my life." She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, who brought me dandelions and called them flowers. Where had that child gone, Mom? I know this looks bad, but we're family. Family forgives each other. Family also takes care of each other. Family doesn't steal from each other and then complain about the cost of keeping each other alive. I made a mistake. You made many mistakes. Plural over 2 years. He was crying now. And part of me, the part that had kissed his scraped knees and cheered at his little league games, wanted to comfort him. But a larger part, the part that had been growing stronger all day, remained unmoved. "What do you want me to do, Mom? How do I fix this?" I looked at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something inside me crystallize into absolute certainty. "You can't," I said simply. "Some things once broken can't be fixed." He stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "Tomorrow I'm changing my will. You'll inherit nothing from me. Not the house, not my savings, not my jewelry, nothing. And Lester, I don't want to see you again." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a funeral pea. "Mom, you don't mean that, but I did mean it, and we both knew it." For the first time in years, I meant exactly what I said. He left without another word, and I locked the door behind him. The silence that followed Lester's departure felt different from the loneliness I'd grown accustomed to. This was the silence of choice, of boundaries finally drawn in permanent ink. I poured myself a glass of Glenn's Good whiskey, the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, and toasted my empty living room. "Here's to burning bridges," I said aloud, and meant every word. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sophia, my 12-year-old granddaughter, stood on my doorstep with her school backpack and tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, can I come in, please?" I opened the door wider, and she rushed past me into the kitchen, where she collapsed into a chair like her strings had been cut. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Dad and Mom had a huge fight last night after he came back from your house. Mom was screaming about money and the baby and how you're going to ruin everything." Sophia wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Dad locked himself in his office and wouldn't come out. Mom kept yelling that you've turned mean and selfish for protecting myself from thieves who happen to share my DNA." "Sophia, what your parents are going through isn't your fault or mine. Sometimes adults make choices that have consequences. But why can't we all just be a family again like before? Before, when I was useful, when my money flowed freely to solve their problems. when I knew my place as the convenient grandmother who asked no questions and demanded nothing in return. Some things can't go back to how they were, I said gently. But that doesn't mean you're not important to me. Are you really not going to leave Dad anything when you die? The question asked with such earnest confusion nearly broke my resolve. But then I remembered the empty investment account, the casual cruelty of Pamela's words, Lester's silence as his wife dismissed my life as expendable. Your father made choices, Sophia. This is the consequence of those choices. She nodded slowly, processing this with the gravity of someone much older than 12. Can I tell you something, Grandma? Something Dad doesn't know? Of course. I heard Mom on the phone with her sister last month. She said that when you get too old to take care of yourself, they'll put you in one of those cheap nursing homes, the kind that smell bad. She said it didn't matter because you'd probably only last a year or two anyway, and then they'd sell this house and have enough money to really fix up their new place. The words hit me like ice water. Not just theft, but a roadmap for my disposal. A timeline for my death calculated to the penny. Sophia was crying again. I don't want you to die, Grandma, and I don't want them to put you somewhere awful. I knelt beside her chair, ignoring the protest from my arthritic knees, and took her hands. Listen to me carefully, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere for a long time, and I'm certainly not going to let anyone else decide where I live or how I die. But what if you get sick? What if you need help? What if indeed? What if Lester's plan succeeded? What if I became vulnerable, dependent, unable to fight back? Then I'll make my own arrangements with people who actually care about my well-being. After Sophia left for school, I called Torres's office and moved up my appointment. The new will needed to be finalized immediately before Lester could find some legal way to stop me. But more than that, I needed to decide who would inherit what I'd spent 77 years building. Sophia's words had crystallized something important. I couldn't just punish Lester. I needed to create a legacy that would outlast their greed. That afternoon, I drove to Millfield General Hospital, where I'd volunteered for 15 years before Glenn's illness consumed all my time. The oncology ward looked exactly as I remembered. Soft pastels trying to disguise the harsh reality of what happened behind these doors. Kesha. Oh my goodness, it's been so long. Mandy Berry, the head nurse, embraced me warmly. How are you holding up? I'm doing well, actually. Better than I have in years. I looked around at the familiar ward, remembering the patients I'd read to the families I'd comforted. Mandy, tell me about the financial hardship cases, the patients who can't afford treatment. Her expression grew serious. Too many insurance denials, people between jobs, elderly patients whose families can't or won't help with costs. We have a hardship fund, but it's always running low. What if it wasn't running low? What if there was enough to really make a difference? Keisha, that would change everything. We could save lives that we're losing now, simply because people can't afford care. I thought about my investment account, about Lester using money meant for my medical care to buy his dream house, while planning to warehouse me in a substandard facility when I became inconvenient. I want to establish an endowment, I said, for elderly patients, specifically patients whose families have abandoned them financially. Mandy's eyes widened. Kesha? That's incredibly generous, but that would require a lot of money. I know. I have it. That evening I sat in Glenn's office with legal documents spread across his desk like battle plans. The new will was nearly complete. The hospital endowment would receive the bulk of my estate, the house the remaining savings, everything. I had also designated smaller amounts for Sophia's college fund, and for Joseph to be held in trust until they reached 25, old enough to understand the full story of what their parents had done. Lester would receive exactly $1 note explaining that this wasn't an oversight but a deliberate message about the value I placed on his treatment of me. The phone rang, Pamela's voice sharp with barely controlled anger. Keisha, I think we need to clear the air. Lester told me about your conversation yesterday, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. You're upset about the insurance, and I get that, but you have to understand our position. We're young parents with growing expenses. We can't subsidize everyone. Subsidize as if my medical care was charity, rather than basic human decency from family. Pamela, you stole $23,000